Has Africa always been conservative towards sexual intercourse? The answer is no. A lot of people tend to think that sexual pleasure is a Western concept. But in fact, coitus played a huge part in ancient African culture and history, even in pre-colonial Africa. For this very reason, the IPPF African region is running a campaign called Treasure Your Pleasure in a bid to destigmatize sex and pleasure among its African audience. Since the assault of slavery and colonization, Africa has viewed aspects of pleasure and romance as foreign due to the imposition of foreign values, misrepresentation, and misinterpretation of the ancient African way of life. A phenomenon that shifted sexuality in Africa from the public sphere to the private sphere, making it more taboo and conservative. Before the European contact with Africa, human sexuality was highly valued in Africa to the point Africa had a well-organized and consistent socialization process where the elderly members of society like Senga, who are the paternal aunties in the Baganda kingdom, initiating young members of society into the concepts and acts of human sexuality without shame, ridicule, or condemnation. After colonization, however, the colonizers succeeded in redefining the concept of African sexuality by shifting its sacredness from communal to individually or religiously motivated sexual relationship, with wrongly channeled freedom of expression and imagination as put by Kira Taye, and I quote, "Our ancestors were not lying back down and thinking of England during coitus." When you look at the ancient Kemetic images depicting fellatio, you realize that sexual art display is not modern, but rather sexual art display was an integral part of ancient Africa prior to colonial domination of the industry, after Africa lost its powerful use of creative and sacred imagination during coitus. According to the Nigerian professor Dr. D. Amanze, sexuality is not only the reproductive mechanism, but also the basic biological drive that exists in all species and can encompass not only sexual intercourse but also sexual contact in all forms. In African spirituality, sexuality was believed to have different dimensions in that sexuality was not just expressed through intercourse, because ancient Africans acknowledged that not all sexual interactions began and ended with baby making as the optimum intention. Most sexual energies were expressed differently through fetishes, fantasies, attitude, behavior, roles, rituals, and even dances. For example, every year at the beginning of hunting season, Kuru warriors celebrated a rite of fertility and renewal by piercing the earth with their spears to reach the womb of the earth, and fertilized the earth by injecting their semen into the ground. The process of impregnating Mother Earth among these warriors involved intense mental concentration on the animal that was to be hunted as they orgasmed. And once the earth was pregnant, they believed it spiritually bore the animals they hunted. Another example comes from the Lobi people of modern-day Ghana and Burkina Faso, who had a dance ritual at the end of every season, where they entered the waters to celebrate Banguela, the ceremony of life. After being aroused by their dance, each warrior would enclose his manhood in a magical skeleton case that symbolized which species of animal he would wish to grant the essence of life through his semen. Most African sexual traditions can be found in African folk tales, like the African traditional nobility songs from the Ashanti people, and others from the Zulu, Agikuyu, Maasai, Mende, Bechuama, Pondo, and Lokele that suggest the collective expression of sexual kink in ancient Africa. Okaje Pisa or Mukazenda treatment was also popular among the Himba people, northern Namibia, and Kunene, Angola, where sex was literally offered to guests. However, among the Maasai and the Agikuyu people, when a man came back home to a spear in front of his house, he would automatically know that his wife is being intimate with another man and would keep off. Among the Luo, Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa Fulani, Wife inheritance was a valued way of helping widows and orphans, in that when a man died, his brothers and his male relative would sit down to determine who among them was most able to take up the responsibility. But with the coming of patriarchy and invention of women as stated by Oyeronke Oyewumi, such practices took a very dangerous turn for women. Among the Wodabe of Niger, Cameroon, Central African Republic, and Chad, their peacock sexual culture was identical to that of the birds, in that they believed women had sexual powers and were allowed to have multiple men other than their husbands. Wodabe men even went ahead to put on heavy makeup and peacock feathers to impress their women. They also put up spectacular dances like the male birds just to attract their women's attention. Kunyaza or Kachabali sexual practices is another Central African sexual practice originally from Rwanda, but was also practiced in Kenya and Uganda. It was a sexual practice that focused only on triggering the female ejaculation, and not just one, but multiple orgasms in women during heterosexual encounters. Food, clothing, beads, and perfumes were an integral part of African foreplay in most ethnic groups in ancient Africa. In conclusion, the colonial invasion of Africa, slavery, and European religions imposed toxic shame into the sacred African sexual practices, as expressed by Nzwegu, and I quote, "It was a Western view to focus on male pleasure as the measure of rocking good times in the sack. The sexualized gender hierarchy of the West eroticizes male dominance and subjugation as sexual. But Africans should focus on decolonizing their minds from this uncouth conditioning and create modern history that push beyond colonial and religious boundaries. Africans, just like their ancestors, should equate sexuality to creativity rather than equating sex to shame. Sexual energy is the same as creative energy and should be embraced and empowered through authenticity.